Hello, everybody. My name is Helle Goldman, and I'm very happy to be participating in this workshop. I'm all the way in New York City, and I have a terrible cold, and I hope that I don't break up into fits of coughing and sniffling and sneezing. I'll try to speak as clearly as I can, and I appreciate in advance your forbearance. I'm really looking forward to telling you about the Viverrids of Zanzibar, and this is a topic that I've been working on together with my colleague Martin Walsh for, well, I guess about 30 years really altogether. We're both anthropologists, by the way. A little bit about Zanzibar. Zanzibar is in East Africa. It is part of the country of Tanzania. It's also politically somewhat autonomous. The archipelago comprises two islands, Unguja in the south and Pemba in the north. Unguja was connected to the continent during the last ice age and previous ice ages. The channel between Unguja and the mainland is rather shallow, and this fairly recent connection and periods of connection and reconnection through the millennia is reflected in the fauna of the islands, including some endemic subspecies and species such as the Zanzibar red colobus monkey. Pemba in the north is separated from the mainland by a much deeper channel and is a much older island in that sense. And it is quite possible that all of the terrestrial mammals of Pemba have been introduced. A really key resource for anybody doing wildlife research in Zanzibar is this self-published booklet by Richard Pakenham. He was a colonial officer, and he served from the 20s through the 50s. He had a number of different positions. He was a very keen amateur naturalist, and he made observations and collected specimens whenever he had the opportunity. And he published an article about this earlier on in his career, and then after he retired, he kind of pulled everything together and tried to create a clear account of species that were there, their different names, different observations about them, and so on. He tried to clear up some previous confusion, such as an earlier, I think it was in the 20s, a report of Viverra megaspila, the large spotted civet, which I believe is an Asian species. Somebody reported that as having been on the island, and he said, no, that's a mistake. And he concluded that they were really just two viverrids on the islands. There was the African civet on Unguja, and there was the introduced small Indian civet on both islands. The African civet is quite common across Africa. We camera trapped it for the first time in Unguja in 2003. This is, to my knowledge, the first photo of a live wild one. On Unguja. They did not turn up again in camera traps, in our camera traps in 2017 and 2018. When we talked to folks about this, they attribute it to a reduction in the population that was possibly caused by some people beginning to hunt and eat them. This was a new development as far as I was aware, and the African civet is not a traditional food in the islands. So this is something that we'd like to investigate further the next time we go. We camera trapped this small Indian civet, introduced civet, in Pemba in 2019. This is an animal that is hunted on that island primarily by groups of young men, such as the boys that you see here, and they go out with their hunting dogs and running through the forest and the fields looking for pests, what they consider agricultural pests, animals that are not a problem for people, like bush babies. They find them, but they leave them alone. But if they find something like a small Indian civet, they'll kill it because it does kill chickens, and chickens and eggs are an important part of the livelihood of some people there. So they're doing what they consider a good deed. The small Indian civet was originally introduced to the islands as a domesticate on account of its musk, and since then it's gone feral. I don't believe it's kept as a pet or domesticate anymore. And I'm also a little bit doubtful whether they still exist on the other island of Unguja. Pakenham recorded that they did, but in all of our years of camera trapping there, they've never turned up in the traps. We've got several species of mongooses and viverrids and so on, but never this one. So it remains really to be seen whether the small Indian civet is still present on Unguja. The Zanzibar servaline genet is a real interesting case. Islanders had several names for it. They were somewhat familiar with it because it is a notorious chicken killer. So this brought them into contact with people. But it's only very recently become known to science. And Pakenham had no idea of it at all, despite his decades, really, of experience and interest in the wildlife of Zanzibar. What happened was the late Tony Archer, wildlife expert based in East Africa, was doing some work in Zanzibar in the 90s, and talking to folks and hearing about an animal that he couldn't really map onto the existing species list for the islands, I suppose, and asked some more questions and dug around, and he obtained the skin that you see pictured here, kind of an old skin, damaged. The tip of the tail was cut off. You can see it's damaged, and there was a skull that went with it. And he recognized this as something that had not been documented in Zanzibar before. And he took it to the late Harry Van Rompuy and Mark Collins, who described it in the South African Journal of Zoology in 1998 as a new endemic subspecies, based solely on this one example. We got the first photographs of it in life in 2003 in Unguja. Its nearest relatives are found in sort of isolated pockets of forest, the mountain forests in East Africa. And we later, in 2017, got video images of it, including some of these morning pictures, so they were in color. Quite a striking looking animal. I'm going to show another video. I just think it's so beautiful. This one's slightly out of focus, but still a pretty good image. And notice the rosettes, the clusters of spots on the back. It's almost leopard-like in some ways. This could be significant, as you'll see in a moment. The spots are distinctive, and you can identify different individuals if you take the time on the basis of their spots. Here's one in a tree going for a bit of goat. So they're semi-arboreal. So notice how the back legs, the feet, the ankles, very flexible, very strong, and the tail is kind of used as a brace to help keep its balance. It's very well adapted to this lifestyle and this habitat. We were also lucky enough to get some really intriguing interactions between different species. One example. Here we have that genet, that same one, by the way, attracted to the bait. He hears something off to the left, and then he walks off, and then he's chased back into the scene by another animal. So I'll show you what that looks like in slow-mo, because it all happens very quickly and it's rather blurred. Okay, the genet runs back in, and he's being chased by another animal. And then he makes good his escape. So that was the genet being chased by a giant pouched rat. It's a very common animal in Zanzibar, and indeed very common across large parts of Africa. It's eaten by many people, and it's also kind of a heroic little animal. They've been tamed and they've been used to sniff out landmines. They're exported to, for example, places in Asia to find landmines. They're also being trained to sniff out tuberculosis in hospitals and prisons. And indeed, they're now, I think, going to be used to sniff out rhino horn, pangolin scales, and maybe ivory in people's luggage and things like that. So they are very useful, handy little animals. Enough about rodents. Back to the small carnivores. And here we have another relatively recent discovery, a relative of the viverrids, not a viverrid itself, but the African palm civet. Andrew Perkin had been live trapping animals in 1998 and 99, and this turned up in one of his traps. Very unexpected. It had never been documented there. Had never been any thought, never any hint that the African palm civet was found in Zanzibar. And he wrote this up for the African Journal of Ecology in 2004. We camera trapped it in 2018. Here you see a still image. I've got a video here if I can just find the button. Yeah, there it is, moving. Interestingly, both the palm civet, which you see here, and the servaline genet, when we show pictures of these to people, including wildlife officers, forestry personnel, and other people who are interested in wildlife locally, who have some experience, for example, they could be hunters, they sometimes mistake them for leopards. Zanzibar leopard is known to have existed on the island and was considered an endemic subspecies, but it became extinct at some point. We don't know exactly when. Could have been 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Nobody's really sure. It was hunted out because of its very intriguing associations with witchcraft, which made it a much feared and loathed animal in Zanzibar. And we have never, despite much effort, we have not been able to come up with any hard evidence of its continued existence for quite a long time, decades now, and yet we continue to hear stories coming from the island of sightings of it. And we've followed up on a great many of these, and we've been led on some wild goose chases, and yet we have never come up with the goods, something really solid that we could put our hands on. Sometimes it felt like we came close, but none of these things ever really panned out. So we are now beginning to suspect. Here's one of our articles. We've published quite a bit about the ideas about the leopard and its position in local lore and its sort of cultural salience for the islanders. We are now beginning to suspect that people think that they keep seeing the leopard because they're really seeing palm civets or genets, maybe even African civets. They seem to be, this seems to be fueling this idea that the animal, the leopard, is still alive. Indeed, one of the local names for the servaline genet is uchui, which means slender leopard, which acknowledges at least a superficial similarity between the genet and the Zanzibar leopard. But really, the modern confusion about the identity of the species that are being seen, it probably reflects real declining knowledge in local wildlife, including leopards, which very few people have direct knowledge of anymore. This, by the way, is a picture on the left of a little bit of leopard skin from a local leopard. As an example, I was shown a dead domestic cat by a wildlife officer who firmly believed that it was a leopard cub. So, and there was absolutely no doubt that this was just a regular dead house cat. This sort of demonstrates the inadequate knowledge of wildlife in the islands, including by professionals, and following up on reports of leopard sightings, have to be tempered with this understanding that there's some confusion. The islands have different kinds of vegetation zones and so on. Here you see 3 different types of forest in the Jozani Chwaka Bay National Park. We have what's called groundwater forest, which floods annually. there is a plantation forest, and there's something that we call coral rag thicket. Excuse my voice. And there's quite a lot of wildlife in this thicket. It's also the kind of landscape that is heavily farmed, not within the national park. There's the Jozani Chwaka Bay National Park. There's the Kiwengwa-Pongwe Forest Reserve. There are other reserves and other protected areas. And there is also legislation in place to protect wildlife, but it's not really enforced. And most of the wildlife doesn't live within the bounds of a national park or a forest reserve. It lives in the patches of forest between villages, between cultivated fields, and so on. And this habitat is rapidly diminishing as the human footprint just sort of spreads. The local population is expanding at a rate of about 4% per year. And tourism has also expanded exponentially especially since the 90s. And this involves, the building of lodges, more roads, more restaurants, all of which need building material, which is taken from the forest, and fuel for cooking, and which means more trees getting chopped down. The population density of the islands is quite high. It's about 768 people per square kilometer. That's a lot. And then even apart from this habitat destruction, there is hunting pressure, as I've mentioned. So what will happen to the island's fauna, its viverrids, its other small carnivores, its other wildlife? Will it all go the way of the Zanzibar leopard? We don't know. We shall see. Here is a list of some of our publications relating to the island's viverrids and other wildlife. If you get in touch with me by email, I would be very happy to share any of these papers with you. And I once again want to thank you for the opportunity to participate remotely. And again, I apologize for my terrible voice. Thank you very much.